Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what cross him.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good afternoon from the Batcave. It is Friday, March 14th, 2025, and I am going to, I've been continuing to go on this Serpent by the Way research. I actually did finish my Apostles Teaching book, so that should be live by Monday, but I'll do a whole video just kind of introducing that book, and then I'll post something in the community section for that. But I want to kind of let you guys know where I'm at with this Serpent by the Way research. So I've kind of written the book, not fully, but for the most part up until the Tower of Babel period. And then I'm working on an appendix right now. I actually just wrote for decoding the Sumerians Kings List, so understanding the proper way to read this thing so you can see how it should line up with the Bible and how there's about 200 to 300 years just BS'd into it. And the reason those 200 to 300 years are BS'd into it is because they're trying to erase the global flood. What they're trying to do is reduce the flood down to a localized periodic event that is based around astrological cycles where the planets line up and it throws everything askew, and then you have a bunch of local floods, but it's not enough to destroy the world, so that they have to repopulate and rebuild. And so what you have in the Sumerians Kings List is this idea that, you know, you're going to have these crazy reigns of these guys that are going to be from 18,000 to 72,000 years, depending on the read, but definitely up to like in the 40,000 year range. And then you're going to have these long reigns of people who could be as low as 140 years, all the way up to 1,200, 1,500 years throughout here. So these are another thousands of years. And then you're going to have, you're going to start to see peppered in people who are like hundreds of years, 1,200 years, 100 years, and then people who are like 6, 8, 9 years. And none of this makes sense unless you have a lot of overthrows of people, which they're not really recording. And then you still have other people. It's like you have people living, reigning for 25 years, 36 years, 6 years, alongside other people that are reigning 200, 360. And the way the Sumerians Kings List is organized, and this is what your archaeologists are generally holding to, and they're generally dating Near Eastern archaeology by. And of course, they're gonna come up with the so-called carbon dating and what they need to back up their presuppositions. But you're digging in the dirt for stuff and saying, oh, this was here when this stone thing that we can't date is here. It's just very loose and stuff, so it's not that good. But you're gonna get all the way down here. You see this dynasty of Mari, which this is going to be significant because we actually have, Mari has its own Kings List. And this is why a lot of your archaeological scholars are saying this list is just fiction, because we have all this stuff like the vulture stele, which accounts Mesoamericans and Lugal, not Lugal's the daisy, but Lugal, I can't remember his name is, but the guy who basically starts the first war. And we have all this inscribed in stone, and yet we have the Sumerians Kings List, which is obviously much older, that gives no mention of it. It gives no mention of Mesoamericans. So it's obviously BS, and it's obviously put together after the fact. And what I'm doing here is I'm looking at it and I'm comparing it to the Mari Kings List. And if you see these guys, Anbu, Anba, Bazi, Zizi of Mari, Limmer, Sharamitter, and here's the Mari Kings List, and none of those guys are on it. Like, none. Zero of them. And so when we have access to other Kings Lists in the region, you'll have an occasional name that matches up with something on the Sumerians Kings List. But I mean, you're talking about, here is a long succession of the Mari Kings List that is supposedly, you see this third dynasty of Kish, and then you see this Unzi, this fourth dynasty of Kish, which Ur-Zababa is where Sargon takes over. And Sargon is going to rule over Mari, which is, he's going to make it kind of like a tributary state. They actually say that he went there and paid homage to Dagon, which is their god, and then Dagon gave him the rule over their dominion. So he gets added to them as kind of like a tributary ally. But we're going to find out this doesn't work at all, because if we do all the math on all this, the most we can add is maybe 100 years there between that and this. And so there's no way we can make sense of the total absence of these kings from the Mari Kings List. there's no way you can do that. And so we kind of know the Sumerian kings list is BS. But what I'm doing to discern what's going on is, one, is I'm using my Bible as the primary source. Two, is I'm using the evolution of these god names and how these kings are putting these god names in their prefixes, and you learn what these names mean. So I'll just give you an example. Ur-Zababa is the guy who Sargon takes the rule from Kish. He's either ruled for 400 or 6 years. Well, the reason this 400 years is probably there is that's pretty much probably the entire time from when Sargon took over and the flood. That's literally why it's like, you have 25 years before, 400 years after, 37, 11. Why 400 there? And the answer is because that's probably the entire time before the flood. And when did they say this is? 2350 BC, which the flood I place around, I think it's like 2352 BC. So there's no way they came down here 2 years after the flood and reestablished a world government. It didn't happen, okay? There's also no way that he did this right after the flood, and this is why people will just default to the Septuagint chronology, because it's jacked up and looks like it can fit this better. But we've already talked about how all that is based on Manetho, and Manetho's probably based on stuff from this era where they're all BSing their things to try to make it look older and try to make it look like there's periodic floods and not a global flood that wiped out everything. They're denying this. They're acknowledging a flood, but they're denying a global flood that wiped out everything by the time of Plato, and Manetho's is like 200 years after that. So we know this. So we want to look at these names here, and this is important because when you see this name Suen is the Sumerian or Akkadian transliteration of sign. So the sign, the moon god, is sign of the Canaanites, and Puzur means the guardian of. So this guy would have just been deified, and this guy is basically the guardian of his cult site, so his temple. And so we can look at that, and then we can look at the Mari Kings list, and Mari is where Dagon comes from. So if we go to the Mari Kings list, notice the names of these guys: Anbu, Anba, Bazi, Zizi. These are probably just regular names. I don't remember what Itur means. I've looked that up before. But the point is their names are mostly simple. And then they start to get political. So Ikun Mari. Ikun means established of Mari. So this is essentially like the first king. So these are probably the people who were not kings, but they were the predecessors who built and kind of ruled over the area. And then this guy is established as a king. So Ikun means established. And then we're going to go down the list a little bit. Notice we don't see any god names like Suin or Ishtar or Sign or any of these guys. And then we get down to the very end of this list and we find Ena Dagon. Well, Ena Dagon means behold Dagon, okay? Well, Dagon is just a guy, and what he is responsible for doing, if you go to that arena, you're going to have this contest between Mari and Ebla. So if you look up Mari, Ebla, these are two pre-flood civilizations that existed. And what it seems like they are is when the Sumerian warlords essentially are taking over and trying to, they've established trade routes that have connections to the tin mines in Afghanistan, and so they're able to make bronze and weapons and stuff. These guys seem to be the people who try to counter that up in the West. And there seems to be evidence of connections of these guys going to the tin mines all the way into Europe and possibly into England as well. But this is going to be the area where they're merging the tin mines with the copper mines. The copper mines are here in Elisha, and then there's copper mines in Turkey. And these are kind of like the main centers of weapons production for the people who are in opposition to these Canaanites down here. So just think Euphrates is your Sethites, Tigris is your Canaanites, okay? And so Mari right here, if you see where this is, it's kind of established right on the Euphrates River, and it's the main kind of stronghold, it seems like, against these guys for now. And then Ebla is their main rival, and obviously Ebla is in between them and then the sea routes that they would need to get to their other metals that they need for their trade to flourish. And so when you get into the King's List, The reason why Dagon is so famous is because he is the guy who gets Ebla to submit to his authority and basically become a tributary of theirs. So now it's all one kingdom. So Ebla and Mari are now all one kingdom, and because of that, these guys are going to basically have a monopoly on the bronze trade in the west, whereas these Sumerians are going to have it in the east. And so we've got a real opportunity here for the Sethites to make a comeback. And because the fighting is mostly going on down here, because this is Eden, these guys are going to be sitting back from the majority of the fighting and just getting super rich off the war economy. That's what's going on. And so since Mari is basically now dominant and Dagon is the one who accomplishes that, behold Dagon is like a braggadocious name, okay? So behold Dagon is where the god Dagon comes from. So we don't see Dagon emerge as a god right away, but what you have is, this is going to be pre-flood, and you notice the dates here, 2360. This is uncertain, but this is going to be, if we got 2352 or 2358 is when the flood happens. It's right after this. It's within a few years of this, the flood happens. And of course, what do you have? This guy's reigning for about 3 years, right to when the flood happens. And then you all of a sudden have this stuff, and look, notice you have this proto-imperial period. Well, they're getting these dates by lining this stuff up with the Sumerian Kings List. And so there's stuff that they would find that they know that there's stuff going on that is synchronized with Sargon's kingdom. And so they'll look at this and they'll like here's Lugal-Zaghazi. Lugal-Zaghazi is one of the guys that Sargon defeats. So they slap this and attach it onto Sargon's date and say 2350, as if, again, the flood just happened and then they just went right back to rebuilding things right away. Well, none of this stuff makes sense right away. And then if you look at these guys' names, so Enadagon is the guy before the flood. You got guys called Ishki Mari. And Ishki Mari, I believe, means, I think I had that here actually, gift of Mari. So this guy seems to have gotten Mari, and what these guys are probably doing is digging up the artifacts and the foundations of the civilization and rediscovering it. And so we'll have this stuff happen throughout archaeology in the Near East, all the way to China. I mean, China will even account this period around the same time when everything gets wiped out, and they're like, yeah, there must have been some huge drought or something during this period, because we have all of these civilizations just kind of fall apart, including Mari, including the Indus Valley civilization, so the pre-flood civilization in Pakistan, which is going to get rediscovered by the Hamites afterwards. But all the way to China, we have all these civilizations just suddenly vanish, and they say, "Oh, it must have been a big drought." And I found this thing that was that I saved in my. See if I can find it here. I don't have the article right on hand, but I am going to source it from my book. They have this around 2300 BC is when they calculate this. They have this these winds that are like hundreds of megatons of a blast of wind, that apparently this blast of wind just went over the whole earth, and they don't really know where it came from, but it seemed to cause this huge drought. And so because the world does not want to accept a flood, they're like, oh, it must have been this huge blast of wind. Maybe it was caused by a comet. Maybe it was caused, who knows? But it was like megatons of blast of wind that basically corresponded with all these civilizations suddenly going away. Well, what that blast of wind was, if you read Genesis 8 real carefully, is that he says, God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth and the waters assuaged. So what God did is something similar to what he did to dry up the Red Sea under Moses worldwide. And he makes this massive wind go over the earth, and it pushes all the waters north and south, and then they're slowly draining under the earth and freezing in the ice caps and evaporating back. But for the most part, God forces the waters north and south with this massive wind. It's just like the Red Sea crossing, it's just worldwide. And so it says after that, it says the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven were restrained. So God makes the wind pass over the earth first, and then this other stuff happened. And so we would expect the walls to heap up like water. And so, yeah, you do have some kind of ice age going on after this. It's not thousands of years. It's probably at the most hundreds of years. But this is the reason why you're going to have all the lowered ocean levels, so that the animals can cross into Australia and South America and all this other stuff, because they've got the Bering Straits, they've got the island chains that go to Australia, and all these archipelagos are really just land masses that they're just traveling along for these animals to migrate all over the earth. And humans are probably going to be doing this too for a few hundred years. They might not be forming huge civilizations. They might be mostly like hunter-gatherer societies working with obsidian and stuff like this. But Noah and his sons would have known how to do this. These guys are 500 years old, and they've been around the block. They know how to make varying levels of technology based on what your resources are and your population density and all this stuff. So they're gonna record this huge blast around the same time, and Mari, like all the other many kingdoms, suddenly disappears around the time of the global flood. It shouldn't be shocking at all. What is shocking is how these guys the next year all of a sudden have kings there again. It's just not true. This is all being built on the Sumerian kings list. And so what you have here is you have literally 3 generations after the flood of kings, and this third guy's name literally means established by Shamash. So if Shamash is Shem, and the third ruler of the excavated Mari is established by Shamash, is that shocking that it would be a third generation from Shem, that he might establish a ruler of a city that was dug up from before the flood? It shouldn't be at all. So here's where Mari is. And here's where Haran is. So Mari is right here, and my theory is that, and this is what I'm putting in my book. My theory is like the first place they went, it says they traveled from the east, from Ararat, and then they found a plain, and they called that plain Shinar. So I believe all of Mesopotamia is Shinar. And the plain is basically when they get out of the mountains and they're going down the Euphrates, and then this river starts to go up, and here's Haran. This is where Abraham's father was. So I believe this gap, and this would make perfect sense. If you're farmers, you're going to look for places where 2 rivers intersect. And the reason is because anywhere between those 2 rivers where they intersect, you can easily irrigate the land. All you need to do is cut channels between the intersection between the 2 rivers, and you're irrigating it from both sides. You have rivers flowing down from both sides. So they're going to start somewhere around here. And of course, you have cities here that are very old. And then the next, you see there's another tributary down here. And then down here, when you get to just the Euphrates by itself, there's Mari. It's not far away. So it's not shocking to think that Noah and his family started out up here, and within a couple generations, here you have Mari right here. And what do you have in this whole area around Mari? Well, you have the Shemite Assyrians right here. You have the Shemite Aramaeans right here. You have the Shemites Hebrews up in here and all around here, all the way down into Ur. And then up here, you're going to have the Shemite descendants of Lud, which they're going to migrate over into Turkey and become the Lydians eventually. And then way down here, you're going to have the Elamites. So all along these river systems, you have Shemites. And right up close to where they would have started, you have Mari. And you have a king in the 3rd generation whose name means established by Shamash. You don't have a Shamash in the pre-flood era. You don't have a Shamash in the Sumerians kings list before this. In fact, if you want to go to the Sumerians kings list, you're only going to find one reference of Shamash. And Shamash literally means, this is great when you'll love this. So Ur-Zababa is the guy that Sargon overthrows to become king. And you see the guys who reign after him, which they're probably subjugated by Akkad at this point. You see 30 years, then 7 years, then 11, then 11, okay? So it's 30 years, then 7, then 11, then 11 is going to take you to around 60 years. Well, Sargon's reign is around 40 years. And then you see Ramush, 9 years, and then Manitushu. And during Manitushu's time, you're going to have a bunch of revolts against his rule. So what is this guy's name? His name is Ishmi Shamash, which literally means Shem has heard. Okay? Now, if Shem is the legitimate priest king of the world, he's Melchizedek, and he's been established to basically help them adjudicate inner city conflicts and stuff like that, then what they're saying is this: it's at this point where these guys are like, we've had it. Okay, see the way that Sargon takes power is convincing people that someone tried to kill him, so he killed them. And then he reaches back into pre-flood records to pull up offenses that they've dug up from before the flood of attacks back and forth between these cities. And he goes to, quote unquote, get revenge on Lugal-Zaghazi, right here, of Lagash, for their city supposedly attacking this other city before the flood. Lugal-Zaghazi might not have existed. They have a picture of some king that he's got in a chain, and they're like, look, this is Lugal-Zaghazi. He might not have existed, or he might have existed, but he probably didn't start this offense because Sargon is a liar and he's trying to take over as much stuff as he can. And so what he does is he takes over who seems to be the leader of the Sumerian cities, and then basically takes over all of Sumer that way after taking over Kish, which seems to be established as the Kushite place, because remember, the Kushites are the eldest son of Ham, and that's kind of the head city in the border region between the Semites and the Hamites. And so the first ruler of Kish, this is going to be post flood. Notice you see 2350. They're slapping that on there because they're making this up hundreds of years later. But Puzur Suin means guardian of Sign. So when the Sinites, forefather Sign dies, they deify him, and he would have died somewhere around 300-400 years after the flood, which would be around the time that Sargon starts his takeover. It's after the death of Noah, and then in that next generation, you're going to have a number of people dying that were the grandsons of Noah, because the grandsons are going to live to be 400 years, and Noah's going to die 350 years after the flood. These guys are going to die around 400 years after the flood. And so it's around that time, because all of the old people who could call BS on what Sargon is doing are dying, that's when he starts taking over. And so you've got Puzur Suin, the guardian of sin, which is basically they're starting a cult to him. They're deifying him after he died. And then Urzababa is who he takes over from. And then Lugal-Zaghazi is the guy he oppresses. So if you know he's oppressing this guy somewhere within this 40-year range that he's ruling, 60 years in is when these people are starting to rebel against his grandson to say, we're not buying this crap anymore about this guy taking over this, that, and the other thing because of offenses, or because he's actually claiming that Noah, he calls him Anu, but Noah is the one who established and anointed him to do this. Well, 40, 50 years later, these people have caught up to it, and they're like, you know what? We've talked to Shem. Ishmi Shamash. Shem has heard. So this king is literally named after the fact that Shem has heard, and they're starting to rebel against him. So Shem has said, no, he's not. He's not in charge. And it's around this time, it's going to be within like 20, 30 years of this, that Melchizedek is going to bless Abraham and the Amorites to go fight against Amraphel. So Amraphel, the name literally means Amar, which is actually the name of the head of the Amorites, but it also just means young bull. Hamar, so young bull, and Raphael means darkness, okay? So young bull of darkness is his name. Now, why would they call him young bull of darkness? Because here is Naram Sin. This is actually his stele that he makes. Notice he's wearing the bull horns because he has deified himself. He is claiming to be a god. Notice how he's a giant and everyone's small and he's killing everybody around him. He's deified himself, and I think he's holding a lion or something in his arm or something like that. That may be another guy I'm thinking of. But he's deified himself, and nobody's deified themselves while alive yet in history. You've had people being deified or, homage being paid to them after they're dead, but he is accepting worship as a god while he's still alive. And notice he's wearing the bull helmet. Why? He's probably associating himself with the bull of heaven, aka Demuzid, and he is probably making himself out to be like a demigod or something like that. And so it's in that context that he's called Naram Sin, which means blessed of sign. Remember the people they just took over Kish from were the guardians of sign. And then Nimrod Sargon has made his daughter the high priestess of sign. and that's his aunt. So his aunt is the high priestess of Sign, and now he's established himself as the deity. And they're probably starting to get into this reincarnation thing about people going up and down from the stars and being deity, and he's starting to claim that he is not a reincarnation of the deity, but he's the deity while living. And so they're going to call him Amraphel, which means young bull of darkness, because he's obviously evil, and he is associating himself with this young bull. And that's when Melchizedek and these guys are going to bless Abraham and the Amorites to go overthrow this guy. And so what you have happen right after this happens, so right after Amraphel is defeated, if you understand that Amraphel is Naram-Sin, you have Naram-Sin's kingdom starts to fall apart. And within 30 years, his capital is going to be sacked. It basically starts falling apart in the years of his son, Shar-Kali-Shari, and they start losing all their kingdoms. In the west, they're losing their territories to the Amorites. In the east, they're getting invaded by the Gutians, who Naram-Sin supposedly beat the crap out of at some point in time. In the south, you're having the Sumerians rebel, and then to the east of them, you're having the Elamites rebel against him. Because remember, one of the guys who was with him when he gets his butt kicked by Abraham is Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam. So he has Chedorlaomer, the king of Edom. He has the king of Larsa. He's called the king of Elasar or Larsa. And then he has him, who's the king of Akkad, and he's basically ruling over northern Mesopotamia. And then they have this fourth guy who is called the title King of the Nations or King of the Goyim. Well, the reason he's called King of the Goyim is because Sargon's is primarily, his team is Semitic peoples. He's a son of Cush, but the Akkadians are primarily Semitic peoples ruling over the Sumerians. And he's got them now teamed up with the Elamites and subjugating the Arameans, who are probably the ones who are at Mari. And he's got them all on his team, but they're mostly Semites who are the ruling class. And then he has all of the Sumerians under the king of Larsa, who is a puppet king. And then this title, the King of the Goyim, seems to be the beginnings of what's going to become the Hittite Empire. So it seems to be basically a vassalage that he is proposing to rule over Canaan. And that's why he's going into Canaan with them. And they're going all around Canaan, beating the crap out of everybody and subjugating these kings to tribute. And it seems to be his plan to put this title King of Nations over them. When that doesn't work out, that group is going to form the original Hittite state that is going to become the Hittite Empire, because they're already organized in armies. They have a certain amount of administrative quality to what they're doing because they're under the king of the world, essentially. And when he falls, they kind of start doing their own thing and eventually form the Hittite Empire. So during this, you see how his son's going to rule for 24 years. Naram-Sin, we don't really know how he dies or exactly when he dies. He does have a long rule of 56 years, and he seems to start pretty young. But remember, people are living still in this era 150 to 200 years. So 56-year reign is not that long. But if he, let's say, started ruling when he was like 30, and he's 86 now, he would be considered a guy who might be approaching middle age, okay? So if he died in battle at 46, I mean, look at Sargon. He's only reigning 4 years. These guys suck. They reign 9 and 15 years, and then his son reigns 24 years. And by this time, their kingdom is shrinking, but they're still holding their core territories. And then another roughly 40 years later, they're gone. They're gone. So you have about 65 years from Naram-Sin, probably his defeat under Abraham. And I'm not assuming he died in that defeat, but he could have. And then from that point to the end of their empire is roughly 60 years. It's not that long of a time in ancient history times, especially when people are living a long time. So what I suspect that the Sumerians' kings list is these guys who are putting together all these chronologies are various rulers of the various Sumerian city-states, and these reigns actually started before Sargon. And then they're keeping track of their lineages so they can hopefully have their freedom of rule one day, or make sure if they ever do, if the kingdom is overthrown or whatever, they're establishing that they were the ruling class before the last person kind of became their overlords. And so so you're going to have all these guys having an incentive to do that, especially if they were ruling over city-states before Sargon took over. And so all of these kings lists aren't like the Sumerian kings list acts like these are all successive people who had reign afterwards, but I don't believe that. I believe they're all contemporary with that. And then when you get down to the last dynasty of these guys, you notice the dynasty of Isin. The dynasty of Isin is going to last from 1953, which would have been around the time that Abraham defeats Naram-Sin and those guys, down to 1674, which is around the time that Hammurabi establishes his kingdom. So you see that total period is about 300 years. It lasts till about 50 years after the Tower of Babel incident. That's their last king. Well, what you have happen in the period after the Tower of Babel is all these guys just disappear. They leave. And this is Ishbi. Remember, this is Isin Larsa is the name of the dynasty. So because there's two cities that are really kind of sharing the rule over this period. But if you remember, Larsa was the Elisar that Sargon or Amraphel, these guys are organizing all of Sumer under. So this would have been the dynasty that would have ruled Sumer if it was independent. And so now that Sargon's dynasty has fallen, they're trying to establish that, we were here the whole time. They're tracing themselves all the way back to this. And then what they're trying to do, and it seems to be this Sumerians kings list seems to first pop up in the Ur-3 period, which is probably the first dynasty after the downfall of Akkad that is trying to claim ascendancy over all of Sumer, as these Gutians are really ruling. And what they're going to do, the propaganda of this list is that Mesopotamia has always been united, and it's just transferred from one power to the other, but it's never just been a bunch of people fighting over power and broken up into a bunch of small city-states. This is what they're claiming, is that from all the way before the flood, it was always one big central world government, and it's just been passed down from one person, not peacefully, but passed down intact and whole from one king to the next. And this is exactly what Manetho is going to do with Egypt. They're going to claim, we didn't have all these competitive city-states warring and fighting against each other, which we know is the case. They're going to claim it was then this guy ruled, then this guy ruled, then this guy ruled. So even if it's overthrown, with the point that they're making to later empires is that it was always one principality, one government, and my family was ruling it. The Jews are going to do the same thing in Israel, and they're going to claim that everything west of the Euphrates River they were ruling over from the time of David. And so, when the Persians take over and when the Greeks take over, they're going to claim, this whole area from the Euphrates River all the way down to pretty much Egypt was granted under our authority, under the authority of the high priest of Israel from the time of the Babylonians. They're gonna keep claiming that, and that's why you're gonna have these writings pop up where it's like the king of Babylon is ruling and the high priest is ruling in Israel. When we know when the king of Babylon was ruling over the Jews that the temple was destroyed. They're not mentioning the Davidic line. They're just acting like the high priest has always ruled as a governor under the authority of the Babylonian Empire, and then the Persians, and then the Greeks. So this is a very common thing for people to do, because the idea is to say, I'll submit to your rule, but I'm ruling over the state of Arizona or the state of Michigan or whatever state we happen to be in. If you're the first guy to get to the next emperor who's ruling, and you literally could be like the mayor of one city, you could be like, my family has historically ruled all of Arizona, and you end up being a puppet king. And that's what these guys are vying for. And so what you have here is you got to remove 200-300 years from this list and realize that this period from in the last part of the list, which is 1961 to 1974, Abraham is going to go into the land of Canaan around 1925 BC. Okay, so if you go back 35 years from that, you're roughly into the period of Sargon's rule. And you're going to go about 8 years into Abraham's rule, or eight years into his sojourn in Canaan is when he goes and fights Naram-Sin or Amraphel. And so you're looking at this period here roughly being as the point that Larsa was put under Sargon, down to the point when Hammurabi takes over. That's what this is. So Hammurabi is going to take over, I think it's around 17, no, I'm sorry, it's going to be after that. It's going to be after, it's to the point of their dispersion. So Hammurabi is going to take over around the 1770s. There are different chronologies and they don't always agree. If you see this, we're back to the Mari Kings list, so think upriver and up the Euphrates River a ways. You're going to see these people start to slap Dagon's name at the end of their thing for a while. He starts to become very popular, Dagon, 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 and then these limbs pop up. Now, for those of you guys who hear the last name Lim, you're like, wow, that sounds really Chinese. Well, the reason it sounds really Chinese is because the Chinese are the Sinites, and these limbs are their cousins, the Amorites. And so by this time, the Amorites have now taken over Mari. They've come up from Canaan with Abraham, and they've now taken over the area of Mari. They're going to be, Ugarit is going to be, in this useful picture I just got, Ugarit is right here, Mari is going to be right here, and they're eventually going to take over most of this Aramaean region, and this kingdom of Mari under the, there's a few kingdoms of Mari. There's a kingdom of, let's go to the Amorite kingdoms. The Amorites are going to have kind of a confederacy of kingdoms. And so you see, remember these used to be Ebla and Mari and all this stuff. Well, now Mari is going to be a new kingdom here under them. Assyria is its own thing over here. These people right here, if you see Shubat and Lil, well, Enlil is the god of these guys down here. So how are these people worshiping a guy named Enlil? Notice you see this word Kurda. Remember the Kurds, the Kurdistan? So the reason why you have gods like Enlil and Inanna and stuff up here is because Abraham's family came from down here and migrated up to here. They're actually up in Haran, which is right here, and they would have brought a bunch of servants with them from Ur. And remember, you're going to have people going up here from Ur because Sargon's taken over all this, and it's becoming pretty tough to live there because you're going to have civil wars and all kinds of fighting and murders and killing. And so not only Abraham and his family, but other people from Ur are going to come up here, and these people are going to be called Hurrians. So they're going to end up after the Tower of Babel with a language that has got some weird features in it that are all their own. They can't really, they call it a language isolate, just like Sumerian, but it has like a Japhethite structure to it, so like a Caucasian structure. Well, the reason is because all these people around them are Caucasians. Everyone they trade with are Caucasians. So they're going to structure their language like theirs, but are going to have some of their own terminologies. And then they're going to move up here, and it's going to be these mixed languages that are going to be based on Arameans right here, Hebrews up in here. You're going to have these Kurds, so those are going to be Medians up in here, Assyrians up in here, and then all these up in here are going to be Japhethites, and they're going to have their own unique language, and it's called Hurrian because they're from Ur. So you're going to have these three kingdoms of Amorites, the Yamad, the Katna, and the Mari. They're all related. You're going to see names like, well, Ebla is going to be a city again, but you're going to see names like Imar, and I'm looking for that city. I'm not seeing it here. I think it's in the Katma region. Oh, Amuru. Amuru is the name for Amorites. And then eventually they're going to come over here, and you're going to have the family, the ancestors of Hammurabi, as these guys are down here, starting to take over down into here around the Babylon and Kish area, okay? The reason I think they've never found the city of Akkad is I think it's just under Babylon. I think Babylon was built right over it. So Akkad was somewhere around Kish, and Babylon's right around Kish. And basically he is going to build it up, and it probably is over the ruins of where Akkad used to be. And he is going to make Babylon kind of the center of their worship. And he is going to take their forefather, so this would have been Sin's brother, Amar, and he's going to merge him with the sun god Utu, Amar Utu, which in Akkadian translates to Marduk. They have a lot of K's in their stuff. They like K's. They're Akkadians. They're like, we like K's in all of our words. So it's Amarutu, but somehow they're going to pronounce it Marduk. And he's going to make the tower to Amarutu here eventually when he's going to reign. But before that, he is going to get into a series of conflicts with the Elamites and the Sumerians and eventually Mari. And he's going to take over all of this, and you're going to have the Babylonia. his empire is Babylonia. Now, before that, even though the Bible says that Nimrod's kingdom was at Babel, and Akkad, and Babel and Shinar and Akkad and all that, is because Babel's right here. Maybe Babel and Akkad is not the same. But by this time, he's going to have this core kingdom right here, and he's going to rule all the way up to Mari and all the way down to Ur. So he's going to kind of have most of Nimrod's empire intact. The one thing he's not going to have is the Assyrians. He does, I think, defeat them in a battle, but he doesn't subjugate them. I think he kind of leaves them alone, and the reason is because there's other threats to him that he has to deal with, and they have other threats to deal with too, because it's not going to be long after him that you're going to have the Tower of Babel incident. If you see 1792, 1750, this is when his rise is, and then he's going to build the Tower of Babel, and then in the next generation, you're like 20 years out from the Jews going into Egypt and Joseph's famine. So somewhere around the time, and it's probably in the reign of his son that the Tower of Babel incident happens, where the languages are all getting confused. Then all of these people down here, which the whole point of the Tower of Babel was to keep these people from fleeing up into the hills thinking a flood's coming, because they have convinced these people that a flood happens periodically. And based on what Josephus says, the belief was that the flood would happen every 600 years, or something like a cataclysm would happen every 600 years. And so these people who are all living on the river systems, if you think a regional flood's coming, you need to get away from the river. And he's building this giant waterproof tower as flood insurance. So you can say, don't flee to the mountains, all my people who are making me money. Flee to my tower, and you can stay there. And so he builds this massive tower. It's waterproof. You can stay there, and then you can go back and resettle your lands. But in the period before this, Babylon becomes the biggest city on the earth. It's huge because people are like, well, if this flood is coming, we need to go live in the city of Babylon if we know what's good for us. And the idea is why? So we'll have first dibs at getting in that tower. That's the point. It's all about the tower of keeping you safe from the fake periodic floods that are never going to happen. And of course, the flood doesn't happen after 600 years, and they just keep building it, and they're like, it's the gate to the gods. We're going to get to heaven with this thing, or something weird like that goes on, because they're just BSing their way through it. Kind of like how in modern times we're like, oh, we have to prepare for global freezing. Oh, we have to prepare for global warming. Oh, let's just call it climate change so we can go either way with it. You know, they're doing the exact same thing. They're just BSing people, and they're like, we need to garner everybody's resources and steal your money and spend it on some stuff because of climate. As if climate's not always a thing. They don't know what they're doing. They lied back then, and they lie today. And so in the aftermath of this period, where did the Sumerians go? Where the frick did the Sumerians go? And the answer is, this is amazing. They went to Mesoamerica, and they became the Olmecs. So the Sinites, remember, there's two different tribes. There's the Sinites, and then there's the Zemarites, or the Sumerians. So this is how I figured this out, that the Sumerians have to be the Zemarites. Egypt has no record of Sumer. Like, everything in Egypt is supposedly just as old as Sumer or older, and Sumer is supposedly the richest thing since sliced bread. Not only do the Egyptians have no record of Sumer, they have no records of Sargon either. If this is great king that took over everything, what the frick? Well, if he's not called Sargon to everybody, which means established king, which is a BS name that he made up for himself, and he's known by other names, which is why he's probably deified as the war god Ninurta, which is Nimrod is probably a transliteration of Ninurta. And Ninmarad means Lord of Rebels in Hebrew. Whatever his real name is lost to history. He calls himself the established king. They call himself the Lord of Rebels. Why? Because Melchizedek is like, he is not legit. He is claiming Noah anointed him to do this, and I'm Shem, and I'm Noah's son who is anointed to judge between the world, and I'm saying no. And that's when people start rebelling against him. So what the Assyrians and the Egyptians do have records of is a people called the Semiru, or the Semiru, okay? And these people are the Zemarites. And they still have some settlements back in Canaan, but those are the people who went down to Sumer. Well, After this, you're going to have these so-called thousands, 10,000, 20,000 years ago, between the second and the third ice age, all the Asian-looking people who look a whole lot like these people over here are going to populate this area. And these darker-skinned people who look a whole lot like the people over here are going to populate South America. That's really weird that these guys over here have similar genetic features as these guys over here, and these guys over here have similar genetic features as these guys over here, and they're kind of lined up with each other in terms of, Mesoamerica was their starting point, but they're eventually going to become the Incas and these other civilizations up in the Andes Mountains, right? But the reason people do this is because they tend to migrate to areas with a similar climate and sun cycle as they're used to, which is why in the Americas over here, is it shocking that these people up here in Minnesota and the UP and stuff like that might be Finnish and Swedish and all this other stuff from these areas up here, which are like roughly the same climate and the amount of sun as they get? No, it shouldn't be that strange. And so you're going to have more Asiatic-looking Native Americans all up in here. They're going to be in the middle here because that's just right lined up with China. And then you're going to have more darker-skinned people with wider lips and stuff like that who might look more like Filipinos or other Polynesians and stuff like that down as you get farther to the south. Well, we know for certain that at least you had people who were coming from basically southern India over into these islands of Oceania, all the way over to Madagascar, all the way to New Zealand, all the way to Hawaii, and they made contact with South America. We know that. The majority of the people probably didn't come from there, but we know they made it there. We also know that if the floodwaters were lower, this was just land to get down here, which is why you have Aborigines running around Australia in their underwear, have no clue how to make a boat, but they're there. How'd they get there? And Tasmanian devils, who certainly have no clue how to make a boat down there, and all these unique animals that aren't anywhere else. Then up here in the north, this whole place in the Bering Straits and all this was all land. Up here was land. It's called the Bering Straits. And then these archipelagos were all land. So there might have been some limited seas and stuff, but you could cross all through here, all the way over to Alaska. And these people did. Remember, you probably had an ice age up here where you had thick ice shelves for a while, but that lowered the ocean levels. And so these guys are able to go down here and get down into Mesoamerica, and these guys are able to get down in Mesoamerica. And then what we have evidence of, if we go to Google Earth, is that, I'm not going to try to speculate on how this happened because I'm sure some geologists are going to blow their gasket trying to say how wrong I am according to the geology. But what we do know is there's this big crease right here and this big crack, and these used to be together, which means scale it how you want to. This used to be closer together. There was a period where hopping from here, this, just so you know, based on prevailing trade winds, just takes like 3 weeks to get here. If you have a decent sail on your boat, you can get from Africa to South America in 3 weeks, okay? And you just have these winds that just go that direction all the time. Or they're seasonal, I think they shift. But if it was closer, it's going to be much shorter. And surprise, surprise, around the same time as you have the Tower of Babel falling apart, before that, Egypt would make note of these people in this area of Eritrea here, and they would call them Punt. Punt. Okay, remember the sons of Ham are going to be Cush, which is Sudan, Mysore, which is where the Misraim come from, which is going to be Egypt, Put, which is going to originally be over here in Eritrea, but some of them are going to migrate over. I don't think Put is Libya. I think I've been tracking the whole migration patterns in the language changes and stuff like this. Probably some of them are over here, but this was desert for a while. It was not that hospitable, so why would you migrate from here up into the desert? That seems weird. Most of this stuff is colonized along the seas, and then you would have had trade routes through these deserts that people would have gone to get cool stuff that came from the sea for the most part. But these people would have been here, and so they would have been involved with these trade routes to Sumer and stuff like that, and probably some of them living in Sumer. Well, around the time of the Tower of Babel, these guys seem to migrate in mass all the way over here to this, they call it the Niger-Congo Delta, and Punt becomes Bantu or Buntu, and it's just the generic word among all these Bantu-speaking people for the people, Bantu or Buntu. Okay, so Punt is Buntu. And most of these sub-Saharan languages are basically based on Buntu, and then they're going to mix with Arabic to become Swahili. And then you have languages over here that are called Nilo-Saharic languages because it's going to be where the Nile and the Sahara merge with each other. And these are probably Creole languages that are based on mixtures of Cushites and Putites. That would be my guess. And then you're going to have a bunch of different languages that are related to these Cushite languages around Ethiopia. And then you're going to have this one set of weird languages with these click sounds in it. And it's called Khoisan languages. So the Khoisan people live in Australia. Or I'm sorry, they look like Australians, but they're not. They live in sub-Saharan Africa, right down here in the middle. So kind of in Namibia and South Africa, and I forget what the name of this country is here. Mozambique, maybe? No, I don't remember. Botswana. So Botswana, Namibia, Johannesburg. And these people are going to have these languages where you're going to hear them say things like...
Okay.
So it sounds weird, but they have words, and you can hear them enunciating words, but it's quiet, and then these loud clicks that are in between the words, and those are going to be intonations that are unique to their. They don't just click. But you have to listen because the talking is quiet and the clicking, which is kind of like, it's almost like similar to how like Hebrew is going to have a guttural in a lot of different words. Well, they're going to have a click in a lot of different words. Well, guess who else has a click in a lot of different words, or something similar to a click? If any of you have seen Wakanda Forever, which sucks as a movie, I'm not going to lie, it sucks.
Meshikat. Depending on the last letter in the root, the noun suffix might take...
The Mayans are going to have a lot of clicking sounds. So, Meshikato, okay? So these click sounds, and I don't know enough about the linguistics between these two things to like formally phoneticize Khoisan and then compare it. But you see how the last two letters of this is TL. Well, how would you make a TL sound? It'll be a to, right? So Mexicato, cato, but it's there's no vowel between it, so it's cuddle. It's like a TL that comes at the end, and these words are going to be all over their language, and they're going to make like a click sound. Okay, so well, they look kind of different from each other because these guys are definitely African, and these guys are definitely looking more like indigenous Mexicans. Well, most Mexicans you would meet in America are going to look somewhere in between them and Spanish. Honestly, more Spanish, because there was a lot of Spanish colonization, and there was a lot of indigenous Mexicans wiped out by disease and warfare and subjugation and all the other stuff like you had in America. So when we meet most Mexicans, they don't look super Aztec. Or I'm sorry, they don't look super Aztec or Mayan or whatever. But when you look at pictures of Olmec people, look at this. People will say, look at these statues. Joe Rogan had this on. They say they look African. And here's a guy today. And they're like, notice he has a broad nose and he has broad lips. But does he look African? No, he does not. He has dark, straight hair. Which is, remember who the Canaanites were. They had dark, straight hair. And they were called blackheads for their long, black, straight hair. That's what they were known for. Not curly hair. Black, straight hair. And remember, if you were to take somebody with black, straight, curly hair and somebody with African hair, which is nappy, it is very, very tightly curled, kinky, basically, and you were to marry these two people, their kids would come out with relatively tight but looser curls. That's common, okay? So surprise, surprise, if you look at the Akkadians, what do they have? They have these tight curly beards. Why? Because Nimrod is the son of Cush, probably with the Sinai. So he's probably descended from the father of your darkest African peoples and your Chinese peoples. That's probably what he looks like. Wish those eyes weren't busted out so we get a better look at him. But that's what he comes from, and that's probably why he has these looser curls. There's some, and this is known. The Chaldeans, Iraqis, kind of have this style too to this day. They have dark, black, looser curls, not quite African curls, but definitely not straight. And it's a unique feature of their hair because that's who they're marrying it with. Okay, so what probably happened with these guys, the reason they have some similar languages, and this is just my theory, is that once upon a time, these two lands were closer together. And I'm saying the Tower of Babel is roughly 1,000 years after the flood. It's roughly 1,000 years, which means we have a whole 1,000 years for people to populate the earth and for these lands to get further apart. And like back in the day before the flood, how they're spreading throughout the world before the flood, but the core of the population centers is right here where you have a bread basket, you have a ton of food, you have a ton of technology, and you have a ton of trade, right? It's the same thing the world is going back to today. This is why everyone's fighting over the Middle East, even though it's like, why do you want it? It's desert. America is so much better. Canada, if we could just get some more global warming, would be great, right? But these guys are basically going to be the core of world trade. Well, it's going to be the same thing after the flood because this is where they start out. And so they're going to spread out. Like Noah pretty much knows the layout of the earth. So he's going to know where the stuff is because he lived in that for 600 years, okay? It's not like he didn't have a map handy. Like he probably traveled a fair amount before he built the flood. 600 years is a long time, right? And so he's going to know where stuff is. And so these people are going to go out and they're going to colonize the world all over the place. But those colonies are not going to become their primary center. The primary center is going to be right around here. But when the Tower of Babel incident happens, because the disparity in languages is going to lead to conflict, what you're going to have people do is migrate to where their colonies were. And so what probably happened is the Bantu, if they're right here and they're seafaring, it makes sense that they're eventually over hundreds of years going to go around here, and be like, hey, there's a really nice river system right here. Why don't we start some farming here? We can make yams. We can have all kinds of good times. And they do that, and it's not super big. But after the Tower of Babel happens, a bunch of these guys migrate by land, a bunch migrate by sea, and then it becomes a big population center. Well, it's around that time that perhaps the Sumerians went with them if they were trading partners, or perhaps the Sinites, if their priesthood to sign has been taken over by Sargon's daughter, that's probably offensive. This guy, why is this guy in charge of? Well, he's related to a former priestess of sign that he's a bastard child of. So his daughter should be in charge of our priesthood. No. He's a mixed breed. He's a mutt. Why is he in charge? So they probably started leaving and going to China way back in the day. And they probably traveled through Afghanistan and through these gaps where the later Turkish, the Xinjiang progress, these Uyghurs were. Because all around here, you're going to have Himalayas, you're going to have mountains, you're going to have rivers. You can hunter-gather until you get over here, and then you get down here to where these river systems are. Or they might have had relatives who did it by sea, and they came down here and they had some little fledgling colonies here. And the Chinese said, we're out of Sumer. This place sucks now. And we need to go someplace where everybody talks like us. And so they went over to China. Similarly, the Sumerians probably went and they were like, oh, the Chinese said you can get all the way over this land over here. And they're like, that's great. And we went over this land over here until we get down to a place where it was a hot sun, like where we like. Well, if you read this Mayan Popol Vuh, which I've read multiple excerpts of and other people's explanations of, I haven't read the original, it talks about these people who went on this trek and they went through a sunless period and they went through mountains and all this stuff before they got here to where they could see the sun again. Well, if there's your mountains, there's your sunless area. So what are they describing? Literally these Mayans way down here, this would be southern Mexico, Guatemala area, are describing their trek from Sumer all the way through the mountains, through the sunless area, through the mountains, and back to where they are, where they can see the sun again. And that's like central to their thing. But not only are they talking like this, they're talking like they have the exact same gods as the Sumerians do. So they've got a sun god, they've got a serpent god, and then they've got a mother and father god, which they call grandmother and grandfather gods, basically. So it's like Enlil, Ninlil, Utu, and the serpent. Those are their main gods. And then they have these other gods that are called gods of the underworld, called One Death and Seven Death. Give you a hint who those are. Who's the first person to die? Abel. Okay, there's one death. Why is the other guy called Seventh Death? Is he the seventh person to die? No, because of Cain's curse of the sevenfold revenge on anyone who kills him. So their names are One Death and Seven Death. There was a guy called Jaguar Sun, which, remember, the one guy is... Nimrod is going to be merged with the sun god, but he's a Cushite, so he's black. So he's a black guy merged with the sun god. Can you see how they have a guy called Jaguar Sun? They don't have black people around to compare it to. They have jaguars that are black, and then they have a sun, and this guy is merged with the sun, and he's called Jaguar Sun. And then they have another guy, and these are different legends that are mixed with... He's called Mexicotl. I think that was actually right here, Mexicotl. This is where Mexico gets its name from. Mexicotl is a bow god who fights the sun. Remember how Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and the Lord is considered a sun god to these people. So how is he depicted? He's depicted as a guy shooting his bow and arrow down at the sun, and how he kills like multiple suns, and then defeats the sun and somehow gets this land for his people. So then they have stories like, oh man, I wrote a bunch of this stuff down in my book. Let's see if I can find this. So then they have these different kinds of gods, and the Egyptians are going to have the same thing. They're going to have gods, giants, demigods, and then people, okay? Well, they're going to have gods, semi-gods. Those are the post-flood gods. So the gods are the pre-flood people. The post-flood gods are the semi-gods. These virgin-born hero gods, and then and then regular humans. These semi-gods start out as part god, part man. The hero gods literally sound like Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And these semi-gods become monkey men, they said. After the flood, they're monkey men. Before the flood, they're made of wood, but they have no souls. They're Nephilim. Okay, so they have the gods making people first out of mud. There's Adam and Eve. And then they have them making people out of wood, and there's your Nephilim, because they have no souls. And then after the flood, they become monkey men. So literally Sasquatches, Yetis, blah, blah, blah. They're monkey men. And then they had these virgin-born hero gods, and they're twins, because they're probably based on Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And they're born of these guys. If you ever hear about the Mayans playing this ball game, the Mayan ball game, where they're playing with this big black rubber ball. I believe that big black rubber ball, it's literally like almost like a predecessor to something between basketball and soccer. It's literally like a straight up team sport they would play. And either the winners or the losers would get sacrificed at the end of it. These people were big into human sacrifice. Now, in my ancient history and mythological travels so far, yes, you have people eating their enemies and sacrificing their enemies and stuff like that in war. But the only people groups that I find that carry out ritual human sacrifice of adults are the Sumerians and the Mesoamericans. That's it. The Sumerians and the Mesoamericans. The Phoenicians carry out child sacrifice, and other people might do things like, especially if they believe in reincarnation, they might sacrifice a woman with her husband when he dies or something like that. Or they might sacrifice people in war, but it's more like King Saul, he's supposed to kill Agag to please God. It's not like this is a ritual form of sacrifice that we do as a rite, killing people in order to appease the gods or in order to emulate some ritual or something like that. Well, the Mesoamericans are going to do crazy stuff. Like they start doing human sacrifice right away when they get there, which the Sumerians were doing before they left. Then they start wearing their priests would wear the dead people's skin over their skin. And what this was meant to signify is that when the dead people's skin that they would wear over their skin would rot away. This is so gross if you can just imagine it. It would rot away, and what it was revealing through the ritual was that it's like the reverse of Adam and Eve getting new coats of skin when God kills the lamb and they get new coats of skin. So ours is that we will be clothed over with the righteousness of Christ after we die. So it's like getting a second skin that is enduring and lasting forever. Theirs is the reverse. See, when this skin rots off you, the God that you always were is revealed from underneath. That's what their belief is. And so they would sacrifice people, wear their skins over their skins, and then as their skins rot off, it would reveal the pure, unrotten skin underneath. So it's literally the original idea of we are gods, descended from the scars, and the real God, the good person, is underneath, and the bad person is on the outside, and it's just a reverse of everything God's saying. Well, they also worship the serpent god as the good God, the God of order, the God who helps humans, and the God of wisdom. And then they have the sun god as the bad guy. This is why the guy's shooting him down with a bow. And then the sun god becomes the storm god, and they call him Hurricane. It's literally where the word hurricane comes from. It's Harukaan or something like that. And Harukaan is always jealous. He's bitter. He doesn't like humans advancing. He doesn't like when someone's too close to being like a god. He is always trying to tear men down while the serpent's trying to build them up. So it's Al Pacino in the Devil's Advocate. He's a fan of man, and God just doesn't want you to have fun, basically. So they worship Satan. They're Satan worshipers, and these are the people that the Catholics basically saved Mexico from by killing them all, because they were literally sacrificing all the people from the weaker villages around them for centuries and centuries. I mean, you're talking probably 3,000 years of this. It's so awful. Well, this ball game they would play, and what I find out is that the names for their one death and seven deaths, so Cain and Abel, are similar to the names represented in the teams in the ball game. And the reason is because what it's representing is the warring between the Cainites and the Sethites that took place before the flood. Why? Because these are the Sumerians. These are the guys who dug up all the pre-flood stories, and they have all the records of these wars, but they forgot them, but they memorialized them in this game that is still being played in the 1600s when the Spanish find them. And so they would play this game where this black sun is essentially the ball. It's made out of rubber, so it's a black rubber ball, and they're dishing it through the thing, and if you see this thing here, it's a serpent. It's a serpent. Okay? It's the dragon. So the black sun goes through the dragon. Well, their whole worldview is basically like the earth is a flat disc with the serpent coiled around it. And they have literally, if you see the tail of the serpent, there's two serpents' heads going there. So it's like two serpents going here. It's kind of like their version of the Ouroboros with the serpent eating its own tail. And the cycles that go on, because these cycles are meant to represent the cycles between the cataclysms, where the snake is always helping the humans rebuild, and the storm god, Hurricane, is always destroying it. Well, the storm god is Yahweh, who becomes Baal and all this other stuff. And basically, whatever this black sun thing is, remember they have Jaguar Sun as one of their gods, is all about like this Nimrod defeating. So it's like the Antichrist defeating, what's his face, the sun god, and the cycle is going through the cycle. And so whoever wins this game, which you get basically by dunking through this hoop, it's basically basketball. It's basketball mixed with soccer or something. I think they get sacrificed, but some people think it's the losers that get sacrificed. Who knows? But they love their human sacrifice. And then they have the loser in this game. In their narrative, he gets put onto this tree. His dead corpse gets put onto this tree, and the tree ends up becoming the tree of forbidden fruit because his bloody dead corpse is on it. So it becomes the tree of forbidden fruit. Well, that guy, this virgin, goes and takes some from the tree anyways, and it says that she gets impregnated by the spit of the guy who died. Okay, remember how Inanna is supposedly Abel's widow, and she gets impregnated by him, Dumuzid, after he's dead, and that's where the Nephilim come from, okay? It's literally that mythology all over again, and then this woman she's a virgin, and this guy's dead, and she eats of the fruit that's on his tree, and by his spit, she becomes pregnant, and she has the hero twins, and the hero twins are Gilgamesh, or they're an equivalent to Gilgamesh and Enki. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, those two guys. Okay, so compare that to the Sumerians kings list that has he's called Dumuzid the fisherman here, the father of Gilgamesh. Dumuzid, the father of Gilgamesh, and Inanna would have been the mother of Gilgamesh. Now Gilgamesh has a different father. So this is cobbled together after the fact. It's not really what happened with Abel's widow. It's how they're merging those stories together with the story of the Nephilim to come up with a mythological scenario that makes it gods and mortals and stuff like that. And so this woman has these two kids, and they become heroes, and they descend through 7 caves in the underworld, which is just like Inanna's descent through the 7 layers of the underworld to get to Dumuzid. And at the end of it, one of them, who is named, his name is almost the same as the guy who's won death. Let me see if I can find these guys here. You have Hurakan. Oh, Hunapu. So the one guy named 1 death and 7 death, Hun Hunapu is 1 death, and Hun Hunapu, Vuku Punapu is these are the names of the 2 lineages. So it literally means 1 lineage and 7 lineage. So it's literally like if the 2 guys, 1 death and 7 death, are Cain and Abel, then 1 lineage and 7 lineages are the descendants of, in their world, Cain and Abel, but really Seth and Abel. And then this woman has these hero twins, and their names are... Oh, I'm sorry. Jaguar Sun. No, I'm sorry. Hold on. Yeah, one of them's name is Jaguar Sun, the Black Sun. And the other one's name is... Hunapu, I guess, which would be like a revival of their Abel creature. So then fast forward to their gods later on. So remember, this is their pre-flood stuff, and then they're gonna have these 4 books, and they're not in historical order according to the Bible, but they're gonna keep these main mythological narratives that are kind of lined up with the Bible, and you're gonna have 4 groups of people with each having their own god that they're going to talk about being the 4 perfect ones, or these semi-gods that come after the flood. Now, these 4 perfect people, I believe, are the Zemarites or Sumerians, the Sinites or the Chinese, the Cushites, which is where Cush is descended from, and then the Akkadians, which are primarily Semitic. I believe that that's who these people are. And their names end up being... let's see, Balamagab, they all have tiger in their name. Tiger of the Night, who is probably the Cushites because they're black. Then they have Iki-Balam, Moon Tiger, which is probably the Sinites, because remember their forefather becomes a moon god. And then you have Balam Kitsi, Tiger of the Sweet Smile. Okay? Now, I dated a girl with Mayan ancestry. She had a beautiful smile. Watch. Mayans are known for... having big smiles. They just have great smiles. They just have big, happy... I'm seeing if I can find a Mayan guy smile. Okay, so I can't find great pictures of Mayans smiling, but I have seen pictures of Mayans smiling, and I've known Mayans personally, and they're just think Guatemalans, think Southern Mexican or Guatemalan peoples. They tend to have darker skin, and they tend to have big, bright smiles. Okay, so you have these 4 peoples, and they're called Tiger of the Sweet Smile, Tiger of the Night, Moon Tiger, and then there's one more. I'm trying to find that 4th one. Oh, the 4th one is Mahakuta, whose name means distinguished name. Now, what I suspect, because the name Shem literally means name, and he's obviously distinguished among his brothers as like the world ruler, what I suspect is that these people, these 4 semi-perfect or 2 perfect men, that there's this whole story about how hurricane breathed a fog on them so that they would only be able to see a part of the world, and that because they were too much like gods. And what these probably are originally is a representation of Noah and his 4 sons. So there's the 4 guys who are almost like gods because they're all living to be, hundreds and hundreds of years after the flood. And then eventually gets merged with the 4 people groups who disperse from Babel. And they each end up going to their own land. So it's basically China, Mesoamerica, arguably the Kushites, which you could say are in Africa and India, and then the Semites, which are staying there in the region, and and they look at those people as kind of a reflection of the lines of these 2 perfect men that came after the flood. That's what it seems like. So again, I'm putting these pieces together by myself based on symbols and name meaning and all this other stuff. It's not going to be obvious if you read the Popol Vuh, but if you read the Popol Vuh, it's in 4 books, and you just break down the various names of these people etymologically and what they mean. It's like, it's like the same symbols and gods as the Sumerians, with the exception of they don't have bulls in Central America. They have jaguars. So you're going to find certain animal types missing and certain animal types added, which are not in the Sumerian stuff, because they don't have those animals there, or maybe it's a food type or whatever, to connect to that god. And so Jaguar's son is like, well, why? Well, because he's black. Okay, but you don't have you have this guy wearing a bull hat, but you don't have a bull there, so they don't have any guy who they're going to say he's the bull god. They might name him after something else. So this stuff I'm getting into, and I'm still, again, this is going to be like a year of research before I publish this, but it's like the Egyptian sun god's name is Ra and the Chinese sun god's name is Re. Well, the reason is because the Sinaites probably worked in the pyramids, and all of the serpent stuff that is brought into Egypt to, you see the pharaohs with a serpent headdress and worshiping serpent gods and all this stuff, is probably brought from the Sinaites from Sumer to Egypt, because they're probably going to both places and they're working on pyramids, and they're both into astrology, and they're probably transporting this. And the Sinaites were probably the main people who started reviving this stuff, followed by the Zemarites. Those are the 2. This seems to be why Noah curses Canaan. It's not because, I thought it was because Canaan was occupying the land meant for Shem. And this is based on the book of Jasher. That's what they say. Or not the book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees. That's what they say there. That Noah curses Canaan because he is occupying the land that's designated for Shem. I don't think that's the reason. There doesn't seem to be a major stink made by Noah or anybody else about where people live. Because think about it. In the first few centuries, they're all intermarrying with each other. It's not like you're going to have them isolating each other. They're not inbreds. It's not like they're going to isolate each other from their cousins and not marry. They're going to keep traveling all over and intermarrying. However, when Babel happens, that's when they start breaking up according to Shem, Ham, and Japheth, because the languages primarily break up according to Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And I think they probably had some designated territory. I would imagine that. Because you do see the Japhethites in the north, you see the Shemites in the middle, and you see the Hamites in the south, generally speaking. So there probably is some order to this, but like the book of Jubilees is going to say how Noah broke up all the territory for all the nations, even before there was the breakdown at Babel, and I don't think that's true. So what you have is you're going to have people migrating, you're going to have people intermarrying, and then when you have the Babel event happen, you're going to have people moving away and trying to get away from people who can't understand what they're saying and are probably attacking them because they can't understand what they're saying, like they're demon people or something. And what you end up having in that period is you probably have a lot of people kidnapping wives. That's probably a common thing. You probably have some people trading wives. You probably have people already married to people who in the household, they're all of a sudden speaking 2 different languages, and their family language becomes like a Creole of 2 different languages. So that's going to multiply languages right away. But after that, you have these migrating peoples who are migrating to territories that are more segregated from other peoples so that they can be around people who just speak their own language. and you're going to end up having them probably kidnapping wives along the way, or trading with wives, or buying slaves as wives and stuff like that in order to have a wife, but that wife doesn't come speaking the same language as them. So you're going to keep having more and more evolutions and derivatives of these different languages, but they're going to mainly filter up through these three trees, which is essentially based around Shem, Ham, and Japheth, essentially. So a lot of the Semitic languages have similarities to them, quite a bit of similarities actually, but like I'm learning Hebrew on Rosetta Stone, and then I picked up some Arabic and started learning that, and they're so far different. But you're going to have stuff in Arabic that's mixed from probably Cushites and Sinaites and stuff like. They're not just Hebrew, type peoples. So you're going to have that, and then you're going to have a lot of these, like the flood. It's a goddess. This is China, okay? So the sun god is Re, the Egyptian god is Ra. The flood goddess is Nuwa. The storm god is Li Gong. The ancestor, they get into the ancestor worship. That's the same as in Sumer. They're going to have the three emperors, which are probably Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They also have this guy named Yao, who has a son named Shun, which Yao seems to be present at the Great Flood. So remember, they've transformed Nuwa into a goddess. So Yao seems to be Noah, and Shun seems to be Shem. And then they talk about Yu. Yao is another name. Yu is another name for Yao. And Yu has the Great Flood around 2300 BCE. This is what they say. They also have Ki or Chi, which is the same as the Egyptians have Ka, which is basically an impersonalized force in place of the Holy Spirit. They both have that. There's no equivalent to the Holy Spirit in the Egyptian gods, neither male nor female, but they have this force called Ka, and the Chinese have this force called Ki or Chi. So there obviously was a lot of interaction between the Sinaites and the Egyptians, and you'll find that the Egyptians will have pictures of Hyksos, which the Hyksos are, I believe, are Hebrews, but they're going to have other people. So the Hyksos are going to have kind of this curly-ish hair, which is kind of like the Hebrews, and then they're going to have these other Canaanites who are going to have black hair, and it's going to be short, straight, black hair. And I expect that those are probably Sinaites, Proto-Chinese. So you can tell they look different. And you're going to have similar things if you go to look up the Olmecs, which are the oldest known civilization of the Mesoamericans. These are commonly known artifacts they have them. So they have these guys who are look like they have more African features, and I expect that these Sumerians were probably crossing the Atlantic and trading with the Bantu originally back in the day before the Tower of Babel, and then after the Tower of Babel, what you had is a very disparate language pop up among them, which would probably be people who were their lineage was descended probably from the same people as the Sumerians or the Mesoamericans, but they were intermingled with these Bantu people who, so they picked up all their African features from them, and then they end up with this language isolate called Khoisan, which just doesn't make sense anywhere else. It doesn't attach. Like, if you look at the major language groups, it's like there's the Nilo-Saharic. They're called the Afro-Asiatic, but Afro-Asiatic essentially means it's because Arabic has influenced it so much, and then because Egyptian was influenced by Hebrew and back and forth, you have two different language sets. So you have basically the Arabs who are influencing the Moroccans and Libyans and all these other people. So that's one Afro-Asiatic language, and then you Hebrew-Egyptian that are mixing and merging with each other, and so they just lump it in and call it Afro-Asiatic. Then you have the Nilo-Saharic, then you have the Bantu, and then you have this Khoisan language, which just doesn't fit anywhere. It's a language isolate. And so what I expect is that there was probably some sea trade going back and forth, probably some intermarriage going back and forth, and then that abruptly ended when you had the Tower of Babel happen. And then notice they also have this. Look at this guy. These are Olmec statues. Does he look distinctly Chinese? those eyes certainly do. And then you have this wrestler where his face is kind of buffed up, but he looks like he could be Chinese. These guys do not, I mean, just look at how the eyes are shaped and everything like this, okay? You're talking about these are all found among the Olmecs. Why do they look so different? Like this guy looks like he could be like Southeast Asian. This guy looks like he could be like straight up Northern Chinese. And this guy looks like he could be an African pygmy. Why do they look so different? And yet all these things are found among the Olmecs. Well, what I suspect is that, again, this is probably much closer to the Atlantic. They were probably coming over from that land bridge in the Bering Straits for some time. Remember, we've got like 1,000 years. So you probably had hundreds of years of people coming and forming civilizations, but you didn't have advanced civilizations. You didn't have advanced civilizations with stone architecture and writing systems and calendar systems. You probably just had the basics of hunting and gathering with some localized farming. And then these guys come from Sumer, which is much more advanced and has a lot more advanced farming techniques and all this stuff. And they use the local crops that these guys have already been cultivating and the stuff that they're doing, and they start forming the advanced civilizations. And the first of those are going to be the Olmecs, which eventually becomes the Mayans. And then after that, there's going to be the Toltecs, which eventually become the Aztecs. And those are the ones that are around when Columbus discovers it. Well, both civilizational groups have a Tower of Babel myth. One of them doesn't involve a tower. It just involves the gods disrupting man's languages so they couldn't understand each other and be segregated to different parts of the world. And the other one actually has them building a ziggurat. I mean, they like the book that I'm reading right now is written by somebody from a Mayan background who is basically writing all these stories from the Popol Vuh and like 4 other sources into kind of flowing narratives that all go together. And he's just straight up calling the Mexican temples, so these Mayan things, he's calling them ziggurats. Now, they're not calling them ziggurats. Some people call them pyramids. Some people call them ziggurats. But what are they? They're almost exactly in between what a pyramid and a ziggurat look like. They're so close to them. Well, why? Because the people who built the pyramids and the ziggurats went over there and built them. And so these guys are going to say that they were building a giant ziggurat, and they're going to say that it was in some place in Mexico. And then it angered the gods, and the gods came down and confused their languages. And the god that they accredited with confusing their languages is Surprise, the hurricane god. Which, if you go to the Egyptians, Ra is going to say, this is their sun god, is going to say that he flooded the earth and he sent the 4 winds so that everybody might have breath or whatever. And that probably is like their version of the Babel dispersion, because you always have wind associated with the different languages coming. So what I suspect overall is that you probably once upon a time had people from Africa, from China, and from Sumer all going into Mesoamerica. Because remember, you have 1,000 years where everyone's speaking the same language. This is why the world gets way more interesting if you just push down the Tower of Babel incident. Not from being like right after the flood, but from being roughly 1,000 years after the flood. Or maybe it's like 800 years after the flood. But still, 800 years is a long time for the population to grow and for humans to just migrate all over the world and colonize and just explore and share ideas and share technology and intermarry and all this stuff because they all speak the same language. And so you don't have isolation of these people from those people because they all speak the same language. And then once you have the Tower of Babel, people are going to start isolating according to where people speak similar languages, or they just know the people because they're related to them and they're going to figure out each other's language, kind of like the Hebrews and the Egyptians did. But for the rest, for the most part, it's going to be the rich and noble people who have power who are going to work with each other. And then the peasant class, they're going to be isolated. Because they're not going to learn other people's languages. I mean, eventually they will, but nobody's going to dedicate the time to teaching them to understand multiple languages until they eventually get slick and start doing it for trade and stuff like that. And so at that time, you're going to have the Chinese people mostly isolated in China. you're going to have probably this mixture of peoples that probably have relationships to Africans, to Chinese, to Polynesians, all mixing together there because the land is isolated from everybody else in terms of trade, because nobody's going back and forth anymore to get to the land where you can't understand what anyone's saying to hopefully trade with them. It's too hard. You don't have any relatives there. And you got too many problems with war because of people not speaking each other's languages and fighting all the time. So that's where I am on it. Again, I'm on a chapter called the Babel effect, and so what I'm doing is I'm just going to these places all over the world, and I'm going to try to go to like the Aborigines of Australia and China and Japan and the Celts and just all these different people, and just go, here's probably where they were, here's probably what happened, and here's kind of their god myths that kind of traveled with them. But what it seems like is you can break down most of the world, and other like academics in comparative mythology do this. They break down two essentially mega theories of mythology that they believe came from one mega theory of mythology. And I'm like, yeah, because the first mega theory of mythology is just what everyone had after the flood. And the second mega theory of mythology is what everyone had after the Tower of Babel. And they're going to mix and travel and merge and stuff like that. Those are your two mega theories. And so the original theory is the Bible, Genesis 1 through 10, 1 through 11. That's it. So it's not that hard to break down this stuff, but what I'm going to try to do is kind of walk through, again, China and Persia and India and, all these different things and show how, they basically have the same gods. And they're going to have way more gods than I'm going to document because they're going to keep adding important family guys and merging their names with God's names and attributes and stuff like that. And so they're going to have way more, but the main, most popular, most prominent gods seem to all be the same. So anyways, hope you guys enjoy that. Hope that's interesting to you. Again, probably Monday I'll do like a formal, here's my latest book and it's released and please go buy it and make me some monies. And then we'll keep going with our prophets and our Old Testament history. And by 3 to 6 months from now, we will start on a Bible study with that one. But in the meantime, I'm going to be shifting to doing mostly the Serpent by the Way research, and then probably some more Christendom stuff on Fridays, or my Thursday, Friday set, and then my Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday set is going to be my my Bible teaching. So hope you guys are blessed by this and enjoy what I do, and have a great rest of your weekend. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.